Chapter 4. There are certain times in this life that you find yourself pursuing a course that you are not certain will prove to be fruitful. Then, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, miraculously, you receive the smallest sign or indication that you are on the right track. Just such a moment occurred when Jason Stevens came in for our second monthly meeting. Jason and I were seated in our customary spots in the conference room discussing his work experience in Alpine, Texas. Margaret returned from the vault carrying Red Stevens' box. With no prompting or forewarning, Jason got out of his chair and helped Margaret by taking the box from her and carrying it to the end of the table. This, in and of itself, would seem like nothing or at most an extremely small thing to most people. However, I recognized how Jason had been raised and that he had always taken such minor tasks for granted. I choose to look upon this incident, even if small, as a positive sign. Red Steven stared back at us and from the last screen. He had a bit of mischievous grin on his face, which I suspect came from his private thought about Jason's work experience on Gus Calville's ranch. His voice boomed out, and well, Jason, welcome back from the Garden of Eden, better known as Texas. Since am talking to you now, I will assume you survived a month with Gus Carville. I always found that soaking blistered hand helped. I actually heard Jason let out what might be described as a brief chuckle. Red continued, today we are going to talk about what may indeed be the most misunderstood commodity in the world, that is money. There is absolutely nothing can replace money in the things that money does. But regarding the rest of the things in the world, money is absolutely useless. For example, all the money in the world won't buy you one more day of life. That's why you are watching this video tape right now. And it is important to realize that money will not make you happy. I hasten to add the poverty will not make you happy either. I have been rich and I have been poor, and all other things being equal, rich is better. At that, we all laughed. Red took on more serious expression and continued, Jason, you have no idea or concept of the value of the money. That is not your fault, that is my fault. But I am hoping in the next 30 days you can begin to understand what money means in the lives of real people in the real world. More of the violence, anxiety, divorce, and mistrust in the world is caused by misunderstanding money than any other factor. There are concepts that are foreign to you because money to you has always seems like the air that you breathe. There are always more. All you have to do is to take next breath. I know that you have always flashed around a lot of money and spent it frivolously. I take the responsibility for this because I deprived you of the privilege of understanding the fair exchange between work and money. Last month, you began to just an inkling of the pride and satisfaction that can come from the doing a good job even at the most menial task. Since money is the result of the most people's labor, I think you need to begin it, understand it. If Gus Calville had paid you for the work you performed last month, you would have earned approximately $1,500. I know that it seems like almost nothing to you, but I can assure you it is the going rate. When you leave today, Mr. Hamilton will hand you an envelope that inside the box the envelope contained $1,500. During the next month, I want you to go out and find 5 different people who are in a situation where a portion of that $1,500 can make a real difference in their lives. I want you to notice how the anxieties and lack of money is affecting them in a real ways, and once you give them the money, they can focus on real and important issues in their world. I realize that you have blown $1,500 in a few hours with some of your so-called friend. Now it's time to begin understanding what the same $1,500 can do if it is put in the right place. By the end of this month, you will report 5 such instances to Mr. Hamilton describing the situation and what you did about it. If Mr. Hamilton feels you have learned the lessons of the gift of the money, I will talk with you next month. Red's image faded from the video screen and we sat in the silence for a few moments. Jason turned to me and said, I am not sure I understand what it is I am supposed to do. Where do I find these people and how much? I interrupted Jason by explaining, young man, you heard your instruction just as I did. I am not authorized to give you any additional information or assistance. The lessons, like all of the others your great uncle is trying to teach you, is a lesson you must learn primarily by yourself. I can assure you that Red Steven was a thorough man and he has given you everything you need to succeed. I reached into the box and took out a small envelope just as Red had described. I handed the envelope to Jason and said, we will look forward to hearing from you on or before the end of the month. Jason rose slowly with a bewildered expression on his face. He turned and slowly retreated to the door. Miss Hastings and I remained in the conference room for several minutes. She broke the silence, and I don't think he has any concept of what to do with the envelope full of money. I thought for a moment and then replied, most of us has learned about money over a number of years. Jason has been absent from the school and he has a lot of catching up to do. It was the last day of the month before we heard from Jason, and I will admit to being a bit anxious about his progress. Jason arranged an appointment for the next morning at the appointed hour. Margaret ushered Jason into my office, and he and Margaret sat into the two leather chairs in front of my desk. Jason seems to be nervous and uncertain of himself. I paused for a moment, thinking about what I might have done had I been given 1 month to find 5 people whom I could impact with money. I resigned myself to performing my task as Red Stevens' attorney and the executor of his estate. I knew that if Jason had not lived up to the letter of the agreement, I would have to end the journey at that point. That was a prospect that did not appeal to me for Jason's sake, and I must admit for my own as well. Finally, I turned to Jason and asked, well, young man, are you prepared to present your report? Jason nodded and drew a piece of crumbled paper from his inside jacket pocket. He cleared his throat and began to speak slowly. Well, I am not quite sure if this is right, but here goes. Firstly, I was driving late one evening and passed one of those fundraising car washes they do in parking lots. It was near dark, so I knew they were about done for the day. I asked the man in the charge what group this was and how they were doing. He told me that this was a group of inner city boy scouts who were trying to raise the money to go to their jamboree for the following week. He went on to explain it and had been a bit disappointing because this was their last effort, and since they were a bit short, at least one or two of the boys were not going to able to go. I asked him to how much needed to reach the goal. He seemed discouraged when he replied that he was almost $200 short and they were going to have to clear the lot within 10 minutes. I pulled my car into the space designated and told the boys to do their best job. When they were done, I handed one of the boys $200 and drove away. Jason looked up at me seeking approval. I merely nodded for him to continue. Although he was still shaky, he seems to be gaining momentum as he consulted his sheet. Next, I found myself at the mall looking for the parking space. I spotted a young woman holding a baby standing in front of an old car and shouting at a guy driving a tow truck parked behind her, and the two seemed to be really arguing, and since they had one of the best parking space, I stopped and asked what the trouble was. The guy told me he worked for ABC Used Cars and that the girl had missed her last two payments. He told me that payments were only $100 a month on an old junker like that. The girl began crying and said that her baby had been sick, and if she lost her car, she wouldn't be able to keep her job, and then she didn't know what would happen. I asked the tow truck driver how much the balances was on her car loan. He told me it was four more payments of dollar 100 each. I gave him $400 and got a paid in full receipt for young mother. And here's a copy. Jason dropped a soiled and creased receipt on the edge of my desk, and then he pressed on. While I was in the mall, I discovered a young husband and wife with two small children in a toy store. Each of the children repeatedly asked for various toys, but their parents regrettably told them that Santa Claus probably wouldn't come this year since their father had lost his job. While the children were at the end of the another aisle look at the some stuffed animal, I handed the mother $300 and asked her to buy and be sure that Santa made it to their house this year. As I was leaving the mall, I noticed an old woman sitting on a bench as I passed. She dropped her purse, and when I picked it up to hand it back to her, I noticed that she had been crying. And when I asked her what is the problem, she told me that her husband, Harold, and she had been married 57 years, and for the first time in their lives, they just couldn't make it. His heart pills cost over $60 a month, and the pharmacy in this mall wouldn't take her food stamps for the medicine. I spent 200 of the dollars buying 3 months supplies, Harold's medication, and leaving her $20 to take him out for his favorite lunch. Jason at me expectantly and smiled at him and said, "It sounds good so far, but you were instructed to find five examples." Jason appeared more nervous than ever as he explained, "While driving one day, I discovered a car broken down at the side of the road. I got out and met a young woman named Brian. He's about my same age, and he found we have a lot in common. I used my cell phone to call a tow truck, and they towed him to the garage. The mechanic said the engine on the car was really short and needed to be replaced. Brian was totally panicked because he needs the car to get back and forth to school and work. The mechanic said it would cost $700. Brian nearly went into the shock because he did not have any money. So I gave him $700 he needed to get a new engine. Ever efficient Miss Hastings seems to have an emotional quiver in her voice as she said, "Sir, that seems add up to be $1,800. I believe the original document called for only $1,500. Jason seems alarmed as he leaned forward in his chair and said, "Well, I put in $300 of my own. Is that okay?" Miss Hastings beat me to the punch and replied, "Of course it is okay. Mr. Hamilton is a fair and reasonable man." She glared at me and said, "Are not you Mr. Hamilton?" I assured both Jason and the indomitable Miss Hastings that I was fair and reasonable, and Jason had learned the important lesson in the value of money. I hope he would never forget his lesson, and I knew I never would. The gift of money. Money is nothing more than a tool. It can be a force for a good, a force for a evil, or simply be idle.